I'm Brice Bible, UB's Vice President and Chief Information Officer. I'll be sitting down with students, faculty, staff, and other thought leaders outside of UB to highlight some important technology topics that affect campus community members like you. Let's take a ride in one of our electric Tech Squad vans and meet our guest today. Our guest today is Dr. Tim Murphy, the Senior Associate Dean for Clinical and Translational Research at the Jacobs School of Medicine and Biomedical Sciences. Dr. Murphy is an internationally recognized expert and a SUNY Distinguished Professor of Medicine. He holds more than a dozen patents related to vaccine development. And as you'll soon learn, technology plays a key role in many aspects of his research here at UB. Tim, welcome, and thanks for joining us today. Looking forward to this conversation.
Great to be here, Brice.
But before we get into our discussion, can you tell us a little bit about the room we're in right now, the Brain Museum? Why is it unique?
So we are in the Brain Museum in the beautiful Jacobs School of Medicine and Biomedical Sciences on the downtown campus. So this museum was founded by Dr. Harold Brody probably 40 years ago. He's a faculty member and a professor of anatomy and cell biology, and he collected these brain samples and had this on the South Campus. There's still a part of the larger part of the Brain Museum is still on the South Campus. Used it as a teaching tool for students and collected brains with people with all kinds of neurological disorders. So when this new building opened in 2017, Dr. Christopher Cohen, who's a SUNY Distinguished Teaching Professor, is curator of the museum, and he manages it. And now there's going to be a digital component to it, and there are tours. They're using it as a teaching tool for students, graduate students, medical students, undergraduate students. He's had Girl Scouts come through here and so forth, and really had a lot of interest in terms of this Brain Museum. And it's located in such a nice spot.
Yeah, it is.
That's very visible and very accessible. So it's a very special room.
You're a SUNY Distinguished Professor. You're also the Senior Associate Dean for Clinical and Translational Research. But about you, what is your research specialty, and what have you focused on as a researcher?
So I've been studying for a long time. I study bacteria that cause respiratory tract disease, and in particular, bacteria that infect people with COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which is it's a third most common cause of death in the United States and in the world. Very common disease, and infection plays a very important role in COPD. And for many, many decades, the best we could do in terms of understanding infection was culture. Well, now with technology, we can look at the genomes. We can go down to the gene level of these bacteria that are causing infection. So my colleagues and I, when I was at the Buffalo VA Medical Center across town, ran a 20-year prospective study of adults with COPD and collected samples, sputum samples, and recovered the bacteria. We got 8 freezers full of bacteria over 20 years. And right now, still, we are sequencing the genomes of those bacteria. And so the way I think of it as, by looking at how genes change in bacteria when they live in the airway, not on a plate in the laboratory, not in a freezer in the laboratory, but in the airways, they change their genomes. And what they're doing, the way I see it, is they're revealing their secrets of how they survive in an area of the body that they really are not supposed to be in.
I'm sure many in the audience will have people that have suffered from COPD, right? And so I guess a follow-up question would be, do you see what's the next breakthrough in this space?
Yeah. So I think that understanding how bacteria can survive in the airways will reveal targets for medication. So looking ahead, what I would like to envision would be we develop an inhaler, and the inhaler might have in it targets of 4 or 5 different important molecules that the bacteria uses to survive. And so you give the inhaler and you kill the bacteria. or you prevent new bacteria from coming in. So then when somebody has COPD, you would start them on this inhaler, and that would prevent these really bothersome infections that cause people to miss work, have to visit the emergency room, have to be admitted to the hospital, and eventually lead to respiratory failure.
Wow, that's great. And that's happening with your lead and at the University of Buffalo. It's
Exactly.
great to hear. That's good news.
Yeah.
So you also have another job, and that is as director of the UB Clinical and Translational Science Institute, as well as you've launched the UB's Community Health Equity Research Institute. Tremendous programs and certainly great for the benefit of the community, no doubt about it. Can you tell us about these institutes?
Around 2009, 2010, it became clear to me that the work that I'm doing is translational research. I mean, it's been translational research all along, and many of us have been doing it, but around that time is when the NIH invested in translational research, and there were opportunities for large grants and opportunities at the university. And so that's when I kind of expanded what I do. I came out of my bubble in a way, and then got involved in clinical and translational research broadly at UB. Translational research, for those who aren't familiar with it, is research that takes basic science observations and translate them into better healthcare. So it can be drug discovery, it can be a vaccine development, diagnostic tests, behavioral interventions. All of those things can translate into better healthcare. And the idea of the CTSI, the Clinical and Translational Science Institute, is to support clinical and translational research broadly throughout the university and all in Buffalo overall. So we have, in the CTSI, we have important clinical partners. We partner with Kaleida, we partner with Erie County Medical Center, with Roswell Park, with the VA Medical Center, with UBMD, the practice plan of the School of Medicine. And we partner with all of those clinical entities to do clinical trials. So clinical trials are kind of at the end of that translational spectrum, where you have a new drug, it works great in the lab, it works great in all your preliminary tests that lead up to it, and now you got to figure out, okay, is this gonna, if it's, let's say it's a new agent that I talked about in COPD, well, does it work actually in COPD? We got a large NIH grant, the Clinical and Translational Science Award in 2015, and have had that since then. Our overriding theme in the CTSI is, I'll tell you our vision. It is to advance clinical and translational research to reduce health disparities and improve the health of our community and the nation. So our work is very much focused on our community. You know, what are the illnesses that are in our community? What can we do to improve the health of our community? Well, like many American cities, our community suffers from race-based health disparities. You know, a black person in Buffalo dies 10 years younger than a white person in Buffalo. And so it's through that the Community Health Equity Research Institute came off of the CTSI through this partnership with community partners and also with other faculty members and lots of other people at UB who are driving that.
So the research you've been involved in and now the clinical trials activities in this translational research is fascinating. But you don't have to be an IT expert to realize that data is critical to that and all along that spectrum. So I'm curious, how do you see data through that process and how do you use it today?
Data is involved in every step along the way in what we call the translational spectrum, from the observations in the laboratory, like the human genome, like our bacterial genomes, all the way through the process through the clinical trials. And then beyond that, when you study the result of these things in the community in epidemiologic studies. Let's take the example of clinical trials. I talked about our clinical partners. Right. And each one of those clinical partners has electronic health records. So these are records, electronic records of all the health data on people. And so let's say in the example I gave previously, we have a drug and we want to test people with COPD with a certain severity of disease so that we don't have too much wobble in all the numbers at the end and we can get good numbers. So the question will be, well, are there enough people that we could recruit into clinical trials with COPD with the particular characteristics that I want. You know, I don't want certain underlying diseases like terminal cancer or maybe in an age group. So we can use the electronic health record data to do what we call feasibility studies to see, are there enough people? So let's say I have to enroll 300 people with COPD in each arm of the study, the control group and then my test group. Okay, and let's see, I look at all those electronic health records and there are only 200 people who fit the characteristics. That trial is doomed to fail. So we could, 20 years ago, might start up, before we had data like that, might start that trial, spend millions of dollars on a big trial like that, and then it would fail because we didn't enroll enough people. So it's those kinds of things that in actual clinical trials where we can really use data. It's very powerful in terms of guiding the kind of work that we do.
But you mentioned accessing health records and information, I'd say very personal information about patients, which we are all concerned about. And I'd say as an individual, we might be more concerned about our health records getting exposed than we do our Social Security number sometimes. So how do you feel about that, and how do you approach how to protect that data, particularly as you're reaching out to individuals to participate in these studies and ensure them that their data will be protected, especially given in the days we're in, which we hear about breaches and hacks all the time?
Now there's a whole branch of data science and technology in protecting these kinds of data. You know, and there are very strict rules about HIPAA in terms of sharing data. There are ways to de-identify data so that researchers can look at huge amount of clinical data and have no idea where that data came from. Can't tie it to an individual person. So that's very, very important. There's a balance, an important balance as well. Let's think about prostate cancer. So, a very common disease, and it is not at all clear right now the best way to manage prostate cancer. And many of us know, perhaps from family members or friends and so forth, that, you know, well, this person's getting radiation and this person's having surgery and this person they're watching and this person they're going to watch, but really not sure at this point. If we had every person's data with prostate cancer in this country and it could all match with each other, it was interoperable, there are experts who said we would know exactly what to do. Data can be that powerful. But so my point about the balance is, if we have access to data, we can do very important things that help people. But on the other hand, there's caution in terms of sharing people's data. So I think it's really very important that our technology, in terms of protecting people's data, is safe and secure and so forth, to reassure people, because all of us will benefit enormously if we can share more data to do these kinds of studies that need to be done.
I think you're right that as an individual patient, we want to be insured and comfortable that data is used. But it goes both ways. We want it to be protected, but we also want to contribute, because if my grandfather passed of cancer, as you talk about, then I want to make sure that, if there's data I have, I want to make sure that data is in there to help solve that for the future generations that come along. What trends do you see in technology? And it's about data, but it's also about the tools that you use with that data. But particularly in your area of research and the areas you've described here, what are you doing?
There are 62 counties in New York State. In 2022, Erie County had health outcomes that were 46th out of 62, kind of near the bottom. Okay. We have 5 zip codes on the east side of Buffalo that are predominantly African American. If we remove the data of the health outcomes from those 5 zip codes, about 89,000 people, take that out and look at where Erie County health outcomes would have ended up in 2022, they'd be near the top.
Wow.
Which means if we are going to improve the health of our community, we need to invest in these communities, in the communities that are experiencing health disparities. So why are they having health disparities? Well, it's interesting. If we were to solve all the healthcare access problems in the east side of Buffalo, and we could provide everyone access to healthcare, access to quality healthcare, that would improve health outcomes by about 15%, it's estimated. So what's the other 85% coming from? Well, it's coming from the social determinants of health. Poverty, access to quality education, access to healthy food, criminal justice system disparities, transportation issues, walkable neighborhoods, substandard housing. All of these things contribute to health outcomes. So in order for us to improve those health outcomes, we need to deal with those. So getting back to your question, what's the dream? What could we do with data? I think the big change, the thing that's going to move the needle the most in terms of improving health in our community and communities throughout the country, throughout the world, quite frankly, is to link these other data, link housing data, link data outside of healthcare with the healthcare data, and then use some of these modern, fancy approaches to devise ways to address these problems, or to be able to predict using data science which solutions we come up with will work and which ones won't, or to guide which are likely to work and then we can test them, and which ones are not likely to work and which it's not worth investing in testing those. I think linking data beyond clinical data to understand people's lives better, to understand their health outcomes, is what's going to reveal how we can actually make a difference in the health of our community.
That's fascinating. So the clinical trials process that you participate in, and it's been honed throughout the country and the world for a few decades, applying that to the social disparities side, so that you can collect the data and know what, within a population, what the results of changing something around the social determinants, right? Mm-hmm. The things that are going on there can give you just as much benefit as the clinical trials piece can give you. You can get that as well, and matching those things together. That's where the data can play between both of those activities.
Exactly.
I would imagine in these communities, all these communities need to know, oh, look, if you did this and this and this in your community, it could change your health outcome by 15% or whatever that is.
Right.
If they can see the success from the people down the street, maybe that would entice individuals to participate. Is that a fair way to?
Yes.
Okay.
I think another way to look at that, in addition, in some ways, is what you're saying. If we look at people, people might say, well, what is participating in clinical research and clinical trials? How is that going to contribute to improving health outcomes, in these communities? Right. Well, if we look at clinical trials nationally, fewer than 10% of people who participate in clinical trials are underrepresented minorities, people of color, which means we are excluding a large part of our population from participating in clinical trials. So number one is, we are not testing the latest advances in our whole population. We're testing them in a predominantly white population.
Which leads you to outcomes that are targeted toward that population.
Correct.
And may not necessarily address the needs of those other populations.
Correct. Yeah. So that's right. So why do we want to include those folks? That's one very important reason. The other is, if we look at people who participate in clinical research, they have better health outcomes, they have more cost-efficient care, and they are more satisfied with their care with participating in clinical trials. So engaging folks in clinical trials is another way to connect them with the healthcare system when they've been disconnected before. The big issue is trust, and there are some, historical tragedies of particularly African Americans who've been mistreated with clinical research. And so now there are tremendous protections from that happening and so forth. But that's our job as researchers, is to build that trust so that we can apply some of this awesome science and this data science and so forth to begin to address the problems that these communities will benefit directly from.
And that is a key focus, right, of the Translational Research Center and the NIH grant, right?
Exactly.
Well, that's great. It's great to hear. It's great to hear that UB is leading that. And that leads me to, I guess, UB is in such a great place to do this, because you mentioned earlier that there's a team of researchers across the university that's participating, along with the hospitals and others. Yeah. So that's what's so great about UB is you can reach into our social work school or into nursing or. So how do you do that?
We have 12 schools at UB. And we need to engage all 12 schools in the fight against health disparities. Think about the social determinants of health. Poverty. So we have this great school of management. Access to education, to quality education. We have a graduate school of education. Unwalkable neighborhoods and substandard housing. We have the School of Architecture and Planning. All of these things. Wi-Fi access is a social determinant, and we have an engineering department, and all of these things. So if we are going to actually make a difference, we need to engage all of the disciplines that we have, all of the expertise that we have at UB. And so one of the things we're trying to do in our Community Health Equity Research Institute is that we have these brilliant researchers, and some of them don't know that their work interfaces with health equity issues. And that's what we're trying to do is say, hey, you could take that, childhood obesity work, and let's tweak it some or develop a way to address it to make it work in these underserved communities. And so that's our job, the way I see it, in our institute. And nowadays, there's more and more national funding. There's lots of ways to develop careers, for people to develop their careers by investing their work in achieving health equity and eliminating health disparities.
We're aware of a new MRI scanner, which is very well connected technology-wise. It has AI built into it. Of course, everything may these days. But, how do things like that help us gather data and help us to be successful in the work that you're doing?
So we are very fortunate, right across the street in the Clinical and Translational Research Center. UB now had some pictures of it getting pulled up with a crane into the 7th floor, this world-class MRI, magnetic resonance imager. And an image of a brain on an MRI looks like the brains behind me. It is so detailed and so accurate. And so how does AI contribute to that? So this new imager has AI in it. So with older imagers, if you had an imager in Rochester, or even here, a different brand of an imager, different year, collected the data a different way, the data don't match up to each other. Sure. So this new imager has AI connected to it so that with other new imagers, you can share data. So, you might have 100 scans in Buffalo, but then there are 10 other cities that have 100 scans. You have 1,000 scans that you can work with to learn about a disease and so forth. So that's another critical way. You can study the different pathways in the brain with MRIs. They are so powerful.
As we've shared some health data among other health organizations, not just in Western New York, but across the country, now you have a way to share detailed MRI data. And then ask it questions. The system, I guess, that supports all of those, to let the AI system start helping us with diagnostics and, I guess, developing new solutions or new treatments. Right?
Exactly. And when you develop those great big data sets, then you can actually use the data to identify, make observations that you don't need to ask questions for. It generates hypotheses and generates observations sort of beyond the limits of human thinking.
How powerful do you see this being in for the good that it can do across the spectrum of healthcare?
I think AI is going to completely change medicine, quite frankly. Look at the advances that have happened. I heard on NPR this morning on the way in that ChatGPT was released 1 year ago today.
It's hard to believe.
Hard to believe.
Yeah.
I mean, this is 1 year. Where are we going to be 2 years from now, 5 years from now. The grant that I'm writing, the Clinical Translational Science Award grant that I'm writing, is a 7-year grant. What is AI going to look like in 7 years? It's going to change medicine. It can inform investigators about the best way to manage a patient. It can interpret MRIs. It can generate research questions that humans could never think of, and so forth. So it's really very powerful. And one of the things we're doing, we have a tremendous AI institute at UB.
We do.
World-class folks. And given that our grant is a 7-year grant, so we are partnering with the Institute for Artificial Intelligence and Data Science. I call it the AI Institute. Yes. And so, because that's going to be important for us to keep track of and stay up to date in all the changes that are happening, and the powerful tool that's going to represent over time.
Oh, we're just at the touching the edge of what this is. And of course, as the IT guy to support you, as you and I've talked about for years, I'm excited about how we can help make sure the data can be made available securely. Yeah. And then the systems that you want, the tools that you want, we can effectively provide those for you and our AI Institute and others across the institution.
One of the things I think that's been, that actually I've liked about the way you and I have worked together is you don't talk like an IT guy. It's like, you recognize the value that IT has in many, many different ranges of disciplines. And I think that's what's so nice for many of us to work with IT folks and with data scientists and so forth, is that ability to communicate back and forth. Absolutely. I speak in a way that is not very knowledgeable in terms of the details and the science and all that sort of thing. So I have to rely on people who have that knowledge, and those abilities.
What can technology do, IT overall do in the Western New York area over the next few years? If you could wave a magic wand and say, if we had that, we could really make some huge progress with our community, what would that be?
So if we look in this country, the race-based health disparities, people have been trying to solve that for 400 years. Yeah. And I just told you the numbers where we are, and so I would like to see solutions to that. And I think where AI and data science and so forth can do that is, I told you that with electronic health record data and with healthcare, we can move the needle on health outcomes by 15%. So that means, yes, electronic health record data is really good, really powerful for helping us make the best clinical decisions. But to really change population health, we need data on all those other things that affect where people live, all those socially determinative health data, and need to link them with healthcare data. And that's kind of the next big thing, I think. And I think if you think about the big goal, and I think what many of us, we work for a university and we work for a medical school, what we're trying to do is improve health. And if we are going to improve health, we're going to improve health in our community, we have got to sort out the solutions to bring the folks who are experiencing the worst health outcomes where they belong, and that's where the investment has to go. And I think data science is a very powerful potential solution to that.
Well, that's great, and I look forward to working with you, Tim. It's exciting to see where we can go with this. Maybe we can solve things for Western New York that can become a model for the rest of the country. Tim, thank you so much for joining me today. This was great. Let's check in on the results of our social media poll from last episode. We asked UB students what their favorite game is in Level Up. Well, 75% of you enjoy Mario Kart in the console lounge, and 25% of you also love to play Fortnite in our esports arena. Thanks for weighing in. Thanks for watching this episode of Tech Talk. Check out our other episodes online anytime at buffalo.edu/UBIT/Tech Talk.